Hello, everybody. This is Tim McDonald coming to you with another Creating Live Hangout. Creating.is live hangout. And I am joined with my co-host, Ayelet, and our very special guest today, and somebody that I am very fortunate to call my friend, Kat Cole. How are you both doing today?
Great, living the dream.
Great, just creating on, and super excited to be here with you and Kat.
Well, fantastic. Well, Ayala, do you just want to kind of, give everybody an overview of kind of just real quickly what we're doing with Creating is and why, the type of people that we're having on, and that will kind of set the framework for why we invited Kat to be on, which we both know why.
Absolutely. We have spent a lot of time looking at the world, and we know that there are certain parts of it that are wonderful and certain parts of it that are broken. And we've seen a real leadership crisis today in the world. If you look across the world, we have low levels of trust, low levels of engagement, and yet we live in a world of abundance. We live in a world of possibility, and we have this definition of leadership that is more celebrity focused, more focused on what people have versus what people can create. And so what you and I are doing is really creating a movement of people who are humble, selfless, courageous, who look at leadership from a different angle and having conversations with real leaders, a new generation of leaders that want to make an impact and a dent in the universe. And so Creating is about bringing a community of leaders that are new wherever they are in the world together.
That's awesome. And I really got an opportunity to listen to Kat. Even though we've spoken and been together a lot of times, I got to hear her talk down in Dallas a few months ago, and it was at a Changers of Commerce event. And she was really talking about this whole topic of small enough to change and big enough to matter. And that's really what interested me in wanting to have her come on, because she is the president of Cinnabon, which is a focused brands group, but it's much more than that of what you do, Kat. So maybe you could just start off by, telling us, we always like to kind of discover what gets people going, and we kind of start with, what the problem is that you see that needs to be addressed, and why is it important?
I saw that question. It's interesting. There are many opportunities to solve, but if I just look at the world broadly and answer the question, what is the problem and how can it be solved? I think one of the bigger problems in the world is that there is a deficit of belief. It's a blog post that I have drafted to write, and it's such a big topic that it will probably turn into a book or an ongoing discussion at some point, this concept of a deficit of belief and this void of great positive stories not getting out to people who need to hear them so that they are empowered and inspired to know that they can do the things that are within them and to know what's possible. And so I think this whole concept of deficit of belief, believing in what's possible, believing that people themselves are capable of more than they know, believing that they are capable of doing good in the world or more in the world or being something even more or better or different than what they've come from or than where they are now, if that's what they choose. And so how do you solve for a deficit of belief? And one way is to help show stories of success, stories of people overcoming challenges, sharing examples of people who have found a way to have big desires and big dreams for themselves, for their families, their communities, or the world, but have figured out a way to make progress against those ideals and those dreams and those visions. And one of the techniques that I've learned from listening and learning from people like Billy Shore, the founder of Share Our Strength, and from doing humanitarian work in Africa with some great friends, and from just running businesses, is that sometimes in order to see what's possible for yourself, you have to take a big goal and break it down into things that seem achievable. And that's the concept of small enough to change and big enough to matter. It's understanding that you can only control what you can control. And while you can't control the wars going on in the world, you might be able to control your own point of view and the way you communicate and the way you lead business or a community, and that can inspire others to do the same and slowly chip away at a culture that allows such atrocities that are going on. But at the same time, just because you can make something small enough to change does not mean it's big enough to matter. And that's where I think we have to soul search a lot, and whether that's a business initiative and you have to figure out what's big enough to matter in terms of my finite resources and what's really going to be the best use of my time, money, and people and energy. You have to do that as an individual too, and think about, if I'm going to spend time with friends or family or an initiative in the community, is it something that's going to actually make a difference? And am I really trying to get as many people, or as, and then maybe it's not numbers, but as influential people as I can, to listen to a topic or give me ideas so we can share in an initiative? So this whole challenge of there being a deficit of belief, of people believing in themselves and believing in each other and believing what's possible, can be solved by having a point of view that if we just focus on things that are small enough to change but big enough to matter, we can actually make a difference.
So that's fantastic, because we do have that deficit of belief out there, and also around leadership. What inspires you, Kat? What are some of those stories that you find inspiring?
I am inspired every day by so many tiny, tiny things. Of course, I get inspired by seeing great acts of leadership. I'm inspired by great leaders whose stories are historically noted as the greatest examples of leadership, whether it's Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela or so many others. Of course, those things are inspiring, and many of us aspire to have that type of an impact on the world. But it's the little things. It's the man who was sitting on the plane next to me today, who, even though he had a cane and was hobbling, was offering to get someone's bag behind him. It's tiny little kindnesses. The man who was sitting beside me on my flight just before that, who he had every physical appearance of being culturally different from those around him. He had a complete head wrap. He had these really interesting boots on, a totally funky shirt, a lot of religious symbols. He was a really interesting, just looking guy. And to watch people around him who were clearly very different than he was different from them, but they were different than him, just strike up a conversation and ask him about his shirt and his boots. Seeing those opportunities for people to just interact as humans and not judge, that inspires me. And then seeing initiatives that get spread virally through social media, all of the very cool initiatives that are highlighting love, peace, and not war with everything that's going on in areas of the world. The pictures of people of different cultures hugging or kissing, and them holding up hashtags that are saying, things like this does not have to define us. And so it's those little things and the big things that inspire me every day, and just working with humans and seeing what people can achieve whenever they're given the confidence and the coaching and the support and the candor and the friendship that all of us need in order to be our best selves. I see those things every day in my business and franchising and my community and my travels, as I'm sure everyone who's listening has seen them. But I take the opportunity to allow those little tiny things to just make me smile on the inside and out, and to remind me that no matter how tense things can be or tough things can be, for every person who maybe doesn't have a positive point of view, or every bad thing going on in the world, I fundamentally believe that there are more positive things. They just don't get as much visibility and press because they're not as provocative.
And I know that there's so many things going on, and you get involved in so many different things, Kat, but and you already kind of explained, I think, what the opportunity that you see is. How do you really see taking that opportunity and turning that into something? How are you applying that?
Well, it's different for every person, obviously. I have the privilege and the responsibility of having a very visible life and platform. And so for me, the way that I address that is trying to use that platform for good and for change. So when I have opportunities to speak publicly or interact with other influencers, yes, I talk about business and I talk about the things that maybe that media group or that individual wants to talk about, but I also try and talk about influencing others for good and use those platforms of talk about more than just the business, but to talk about how the business can influence change. I recently went up to visit the Chamber of Commerce and talk with the Chamber of Commerce about how they support businesses and what they're doing with their foundation and their training to train entrepreneurs and teach businesses, so that I could understand what's available and also have not only a seat but a voice with that organization with more progressive points of view. And so not everyone can just get a meeting with the leaders of the Chamber of Commerce for the United States Chamber of Commerce. And so that's an example of how I personally use where I sit now as an advantage and to open doors, but to have meaningful conversations, not just about maintaining the status quo, but about pushing things forward in a very collaborative, cohesive way, and not in a politically polarizing way, but by just talking about the way the world is changing and what people can do for good. And the other little things that I do is just try to lead by example. And I think that's what that's the only thing each of us can do. We all have different lives. We all have different circles of influence. We all have different communities that we affect. And so whether it's working with the Women's Food Service Forum or the Chambers of Commerce or the Global Hope Network International with their humanitarian work overseas, those are my communities. Those are the groups that I interact in. And so I have to lead by example. I think the other thing that people can do, and I share this especially with students constantly, is I try to remind people that each one of us has a story to tell, and there's someone around you who could learn something or be inspired by your story. How you grew up, the challenges that you've had, the successes that you've experienced, and the dreams that you have. So many people will come to me and say, well, I'm just this. I'm only this old and I've only done these things. And I try to explain so often that you are an inspiration to someone. Everyone is. You don't have to be a public speaker. You don't have to be a CEO. You don't have to be a manager of department. Just the way you live your life and the challenges that you have experienced, if they're just shared, and sharing could be over a cup of coffee, it could be a personal blog, it could be a tweet, it could be sharing with a family member when you're together, just being a little bit vulnerable and open. Just by sharing those things, it's amazing how many people say, wow, thank you for sharing that. I've dealt with that too. And it makes them feel better, or they've dealt with it and can help you with a challenge that you've had. And I have benefited from many people's counsel my whole life, but the only reason I had access to their feedback was because I was comfortable in sharing my flaws or my mistakes or my challenges. And then when you put yourself in that position, it is human nature in most cases for people to try and be helpful, or at least reciprocate by sharing their stories. So I think the third way that you could really powerfully make that change is by being a little bit vulnerable and sharing what you're thinking about or wondering. And that may expose you a little bit, but it could also open up possibilities of great conversations, helping others and allowing you to be helped by others who might have some common points of view.
Fabulous. One question we ask everybody, and you touched on it, but I'd love to get a more focused question to frame it, is what does leadership mean to you? What does it mean, and what does being a leader mean to you, and how can people be leaders?
Well, first, leadership is not just leading a group of people. There's such a thing as leadership of self. And I think what I was just touching on, this concept of the fact that someone is always looking up to you, whether you realize it or not, we all have the opportunity to lead through our influence. And that means being a leader of self first, and understanding that your actions or your lack of action and your words, what you say or what you choose not to say, they mean a lot, and they not only communicate about your points of view and how you want to show up in the world, but they set an example for others who are watching. And so to me, leadership is really about taking the responsibility and the opportunity that you have to be the best version of yourself, to then help others in turn do the same, be the best versions of themselves. And the more classic definition of leadership that I use a lot is the ability to create an environment where other people motivate themselves to achieve mutually beneficial goals. That's sort of a classic definition of team leadership, but even self-leadership. So you're doing things that create an environment where people motivate themselves as a result to achieve some version of mutually beneficial goals. But I really do think it's just the broad responsibility to really challenge yourself to be the best you can so that others around see that example, and you have the highest likelihood of helping everything and everyone around you rise to their fullest capability.
So how does this void of beliefs impact leadership in your worldview? What can we do about it?
Well, first, how it impacts leadership is if you don't have a belief in what's possible, how can you help others believe in what's possible? It's actually a very cut and dry impact on leadership. If you can't believe, how can you get others to believe? In terms of what can you do about it, I'd go back to what I was bringing up earlier, this concept of celebrating people's successes and allowing people to be their authentic self and celebrating the things that they go through. That is leadership, and that helps people see that they can believe in themselves. My story gets told because it's odd and unique, and I started out in restaurants and worked my way up to corporate positions. But the funny thing is, it's actually not odd and it's not unique. Lots and lots of people start at entry-level positions. Everyone has to have a first job. And so they start somewhere and work their way up some version of success that is as success is defined for them. Not everyone wants to be the president of the company. There are some stories out there of people who are incredible parents despite unsurmountable, difficult challenges and odds, and their stories need to be told more. We need to celebrate all different types of success. So I think how we get at it in order to positively affect leadership by shrinking the deficit of belief is by celebrating all the different versions of what's possible in the world, by sharing how ordinary people do extraordinary things by just believing or being resilient or leaning on their friends and their family and doing all the basic things that it takes for anyone to overcome the challenges that we all deal with in life. And I think the other way we get at it is continuing to embrace a little bit more vulnerability in the leaders and people who are in visible positions. So that fallibility, one of my friends who's an executive at Coca-Cola, she uses the word flawsome, which is being awesome with your flaws. And I think the more we celebrate that and the more that we show that, the more people will see, okay, now that I can hear these stories of this person making those mistakes, I don't have this delusion that I have to be perfect in order to have some different level of success. I understand that success comes, whatever success means to any individual, comes with overcoming challenges. And sometimes that's the part of the story that's not told. The successes are glamorized, the accomplishments are glamorized. Think about what people put on Facebook. They put their best moments of their lives on Facebook. Their family, their friends, their achievements, their gifts, their travels. And that's wonderful because you want to share the good things. But we're getting a lot of images of lives that are without flaws. And none of our lives are without flaws. Do I have an interest to talk in talking about every single one of my challenges on Facebook? No. But whenever I give my speeches, whenever I mentor employees, whenever I'm talking to a friend, I absolutely always share the little challenges and the big ones that come up. So I think we all have a responsibility, no matter what our role, a family member, a friend, a department leader, a CEO, or an NGO champion, someone doing humanitarian work, to share our challenges. I was in Africa recently with a bunch of my friends who are also friends of Tim's, and we were sitting around with a village who had experienced a great deal of positive change. And it's actually mind-blowing how much positive change they have experienced. And when we asked why, we know we worked on these initiatives together, but why have they been so unbelievably successful? And they pointed to a young man who is he's the boots on the ground. He's the person who's from the village who actually is employed by this NGO to coach the village and help themselves to prosperity. And they pointed to him. His name is Lemmy. And they said, because he comes with us every day and he eats what we eat and he sleeps where we sleep and he lives how we live. And he is willing to go through that with us, and that builds trust, and therefore we are more likely to follow his coaching, and it has benefited not only their village, but now all the other villages in the Kabele around them who are coming to see their progress and try to duplicate it. And that comes from Lemmy having great humility, but also understanding the truth is, if you want to create meaningful change in the world, you have to go where the stuff is happening and be in it. You can't point to it from afar. I see lots of people who sit on social media and they only follow the political party that they feel a part of, or they only follow or interact with leaders who have their same mindset. And how do you truly have a broad point of view when all you're doing is affirming your own beliefs and actions constantly? But that's human nature. We seek commonality. We want to be with people who are like us. But as a result of that tendency and that natural human desire, we are missing all the other inputs that are needed to help us connect with all the different constituents in the world. And therefore, we only believe what our immediate community is perpetuating. So I think part of the way you have to address the deficit of belief and affect leadership is give people more permission to be a part of diverse groups. I mean, look how our politicians are crucified if they are Republicans or Democrats, and if they dare share support for something that seems out of party. It's almost a crime for people to change their minds, once they get contact with new information. How can we evolve as a group of leaders and as a society if we don't give people permission to learn and expand and grow and participate in different groups? So it's going to take a lot of work in order to develop the state of higher consciousness and the state of more openness and more collaborative ways of thinking and leading, because it is so difficult for people to jump out of their box or their channel or their funnel, because they get crucified for it. And so it takes a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of courageous leaders to be the bridge people, as I like to call them, the people who can connect with many different types of leaders and constituents, who can connect with many different challenges and efforts and initiatives in the world, and try to speak many languages to bring people together.
Wow, that is fantastic, because I think a lot of people think someone else is going to do things for them, and really understanding what's inside of you is really important. So Tim, what questions do you have?
Well, I think I really honestly feel like I should have scheduled an hour or two with you, Kat, instead of just a half an hour. But one thing that I think I always like to ask is, what can we, and I mean this in two different ways, Ayelet and myself, but just anybody that's watching this, what can we do to help you in what you're trying to accomplish?
There are a few things, some very tactical, but some really more about just having a different approach to the world. So one is go to changersofcommerce.com, check out you can follow us on Twitter, Commerce Changers, or go to the Facebook page and just take the pledge to, if you are in business, NGO, nonprofit, or for-profit, to be connected to society and learn more about the concepts of connected, creative, and conscious capitalism. Be open to that and see the different ways that you can really lead a for-profit or a nonprofit, but do your part in changing the world. So that's a very tactical piece. So join us and follow us and be a part of the discussion. Broadly, I would say, go through life and interacting with real people in real life, but also online, assuming positive intent. And really try to challenge your own beliefs. And that means following people in social media who are not like you. That means trying to read newspapers or news outlets through Twitter or through Facebook or online that are actually from other countries, and take an interest in how different stories are spun very, very differently around the world, and try to develop an informed point of view so that you are well grounded in your opinions, and so you can see how the world is shown things so differently, even what's going on right now with Israel and Gaza. And I have friends who are on sort of both sides, if you will, of that fight, and the people who are involved because of their families being from that region, but relatively not super active. But if you dig deep and you watch the news as it's presented to them, and you learn just one layer deeper than what the media is sharing, you will see that there is much more to the story. And it doesn't mean you feel differently, and it doesn't mean that things that you thought were wrong become right, or things that you thought were right become wrong. They just become a little deeper, and you realize that it is harder to judge than most people probably think. And I think the world jumps to judge and jumps to conclusions so quickly because they aren't given the coaching and the counsel to seek a deeper understanding. And I've talked to politicians and I've talked to business leaders who have said, well, the general public doesn't care about that. They don't want to go that deep. And I really don't believe that. I believe that the only reason people don't go a step deeper is they don't know how, or they aren't encouraged to. They're encouraged to stay in their group where their center of gravity is. And if we can celebrate more bridge people, more people who are presenting conflicting points of view or seeking to understand conflicting points of view, to maybe have a more reasonable debate and discussion, or who might who knows, come up with really great ideas. That's why I'm a part of this group, Young Global Leaders with the World Economic Forum, is it brings people together from all over the world to literally try and attack the world's problems, but who are committed to not judging. And we're talking big, big issues like poverty, because we're committed to not judging. And that's hard to find people who are willing to go deep on issues and not judge in the process, to try and learn and then come up with some type of progressive steps to a solution. So hopefully people will assume positive intent and try to get their news and their information, whether it's about their own business or their team members or events in the world, try to get it from a different place once in a while, and you might be surprised what you learn.
What role does purpose play in your life, Kat?
I heard a quote from a woman at a speaker who was a speaker at the Women's Food Service Forum once. Her name is Dr. Bertice Berry, and she has a quote that sums it up perfectly for me. And I heard her say this the first time I ever heard her speak, and I'm one of her raving fans as a result. And it is, when you walk with purpose, you collide with destiny. And purpose to me is that thing that you realize at some point that you are really good at with less effort than others. And it just feels right when you're doing it. And as soon as you realize what that thing or those few things are, you try to fill your life with as many opportunities to do that as possible, because it makes you the best version of yourself. And again, like she says, when you walk with purpose, when you're filled with that light, when you're the best version of yourself, you collide with destiny. And I really do believe that. I was fortunate to learn some of the things that I was passionate about and that really were my calling and my purpose at a pretty young age, because I was paying attention to the things that I loved doing, but also seemed to create change that seemed to be easier for me than others. And I learned what things are not my purpose. I am not a good singer. I am not a good driver. I cannot, I shouldn't be driving people anywhere, and I shouldn't be lighting up the world with my vocal gifts, but I can help people realize that they're capable of more than they know, and I'm particularly good at that in situations of chaos. And so I have done that in many different ways throughout my career, and when people ask me, what will I be doing in 5 years or 10 years, my answer is always, I have no idea, but I do know that I will be living out the same purpose. I will be helping people realize, people, therefore groups, therefore communities, companies, and who knows, maybe even countries one day. I help people realize they're capable of more than they know. And whether that's through cheerleading, support, training, coaching, tough love, leadership, perspective, expertise, or decision making, those are the things that I can do. And so I will always do that the rest of my life. I will be called many different things. I will be involved in many different groups where that sense of purpose manifests itself. But by walking with purpose, I am constantly colliding with groups that I think, wow, it's almost like this opportunity was custom made for me, or I can't believe I just met this person at this time. It's so aligned with my point of view. And I truly believe it's because I embrace my purpose. And because of that, I talk about it a lot, and I write about it a lot, and I try to create change in the spirit of that purpose. And that is like flicking a domino. It creates so many other dominoes that eventually create change. And I believe it's just a game of math. When you are on purpose and you know it, you talk about it a lot and you try to live it a lot, you exponentially increase your chances of people knowing about it and therefore bringing opportunities to you that allow you to continue to live your purpose. And so embracing who you are and what you're all about and whatever your natural gift is a pretty important step in being a great leader.
Excellent. That question was for you, Tim. And the answer?
Well, and I was going to say, my title at Be the Change Revolutions is Purveyor of Purpose. So I threw that in there for me, and I loved your answer, Kat. So this has just been a great finish for this Creating.is hangout, and I just want to thank you so much, Kat, for joining us. I just am inspired by you all the time and everything that you do, and I think just really give everybody just a very simple, way that we can all look at how we can make substantial change in the world. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
And I think, we talk about things that are broken and having deficits, but what you show us and bring into the world is the hope and possibility of what each one of us can do, and the ability that it all only takes one step from one person to do something wherever you are in the world, whether you're in a slum in Kibera or whether you're sitting in New York City or in London. There's something that you can do. So thank you for your humility, your passion, your purpose, and you just inspired me for the rest of my life. So thank you.
Well, thank you both very much. Love what you're doing.